I am the first successful whistleblower on issues of public health and safety in the biotech arena. My fight was against Pfizer, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. In 2010, a jury unanimously decided that Pfizer had used willful and wanton misconduct against me for my free speech on safety issues of public concern. The jury understood that workers are at the front line, not only for protecting themselves, but also for keeping the public safe and informed. Yet despite this great victory for free speech for scientists, what I have learned through this process should be of concern for all of you who sit here today within the East Bay Green Corridor with multiple biolabs being established. And that is, there are no adequate regulations, oversight, or workers' rights within this industry to protect you. And even more concerning is the overwhelming conflict of interest within the biomedical academic community. All these together put the public at substantial risk for harm. Now, I'm a molecular biologist of 23 years. I was doing advanced molecular biology. I worked in neurobiology, human genetic disease, vaccine design, developmental biology, and lastly at Pfizer, developing genetic technologies in embryonic stem cells laboratory. Now I want to give you just a flavor of the technologies that were being used, and in fact, I was designing these specific technologies. And this is a bio-level safety 2 lab. There's 4 levels, and this is a level that's very common in academic and publicly funded universities and private labs. I was developing disease state models, and sometimes as a scientist we have to do that because we have to make cells sick so we can find drugs perhaps to cure disease. One of the technologies that I was developing is something called shRNA, and in layman's terms I'm going to call it a genetic missile. And if I can give you the analogy, the Tomahawk cruise missile that's being launched from a ship from the ocean, has some sort of GPS unit on it and can strike a building from 1,000 miles away. That same technology we have on a molecular level, and I was designing and developing these technologies for drug discovery. So the technology itself is not dangerous unless you equipped it with something to get inside the cells. And they do that using genetically engineered viruses. They will put these genetic missiles into genetically engineered viruses. And you sitting there should realize that this is a danger if these are not biocontained. They can cause new emerging disease, they cause cancers, metabolic targeted disorders, neuropathy, all different types of illness. Now that was the problem that I was having at Pfizer, we were having, me and my coworkers. We had several problems. We had chemical, radioisotope, bloodborne pathogen, and genetically engineered virus containment problems. The major problems, we didn't have adequate break room. Our break room was in a working hallway where they would be carrying pathogens or genetically engineered viruses. They would be left on benches where we eat and drink. The other problem was no safe office space. There are times in biotechnology where you could have an office space when you're doing an experiment, but if you're bringing in dangerous technologies and infectious agents, you shouldn't have an office without proper personal protection. The other issues were people were becoming ill in our laboratory. So I and others tried to raise these issues at Pfizer. And as an employee, the first thing you do is informally. We want to bring these issues up formally. So we would go to our managers, and we were either ignored or told we were hypersensitive. And I'll give you an example. Once we use a compound called ethidium bromide quite often in molecular biology because it stains DNA, but it's a known carcinogen. And we often found where we eat and drink because people were staining gels and leaving it. So I went up to a manager, I said, listen, we've got to correct this problem. We need a safer break area. And he said, oh, I've been working with that when I was a graduate student with my bare hands and I don't have cancer yet. So it's these shocking remarks and just ignoring us. And it was just, we couldn't really get anywhere with it. So I was on the safety committee at the time, so I brought these issues forward in the safety committee and said, let's try to solve these problems as scientists, and if we can't solve them, let's go to management and document it. 2 hours after I left that meeting, I got a note on my email. Stop documenting safety within the safety problems within the safety committee. Literally. I couldn't believe it. And then a campaign or a culture of fear and intimidation within our department to raise safety issues started occurring. And in fact, people came up to me and said, Becky, I can't do this any longer. I've got a wife and child. I didn't stop. I mean, I wasn't out there screaming and yelling, but I just couldn't believe it. And this is sheer irresponsibility. And it's a public health and safety issue, especially when we're finding genetically engineered viruses where we eat and drink. So I wrote the head of Groton Laboratories and asked them, how do you operate your safety budget? Because our scientists are being unnecessarily exposed to dangerous substances and biological materials. And it took 4 months for them to call me into the office, and the head of environmental health and safety called me into her office, and she literally said, we can't help you. Pfizer bases their safety policy budget on what is legal and not what is safe. So her job was not for safety of 6,000 scientists that work at Pfizer. Her job was to tell upper management, who was in New York City or something, what the legal framework for oversight was. And she could operate her budget only within that legal framework. And unfortunately, Pfizer said, workers really don't have any rights because there's no legal framework. Well, I was quite shocked and still continued trying to fix the problem, and I ended up being retaliated against. And if anybody has ever experienced bullying and all types of horrible abuse from, I even was literally put up against the wall and was threatened that they could ruin my career. But the worst thing happened in the sense of what I was trying to prevent happened to me. During that time of retaliation, I was exposed to a human infectious genetically engineered virus. A manager told an untrained worker to use this agent, transducing cells, on my bench, right next to my office. And I didn't have any personal protection. I didn't know it at the time. My lab no longer was a BL2 lab, it was a BL1 lab. There shouldn't have been even any infectious agents in our lab. And I immediately became ill and was going to doctors trying to figure out what was going on. It was a slow progressive illness. It started with half my face going numb. And the physicians thought I might have MS. And along with that and being retaliated against, I had to go on medical leave because I had to figure out what this mystery illness was. Pfizer remained retaliatory to me when I was on medical leave and would not negotiate with me. I was very apprehensive to go back to work with these serious problems, and I was sick. So I had to go to OSHA. I had no choice. Even though in prior discussions with my co-workers, we knew going to OSHA meant death, basically, for your job and for your career. So I did go to OSHA, and I requested 3 things from them. I requested lab inspection, please go into my department, fix our problems. And I gave them documentation of the problems that I and others had documented. I also said, please give them a forum. We didn't have a forum to, where would we get our safety concerns addressed? They just were constantly being ignored. The second thing, I wanted my exposure records, because I had been, I knew I had been exposed by some sort of agent, but I didn't know the identity. And Pfizer at that time told me trade secret supersedes my right to get that. As a matter of fact, when I wrote them a letter on medical leave and asked them for that information, I was fired a month later. So, because as an employee, you have more rights to those records than if you're terminated. So they terminated me. And the third thing that I wanted OSHA to resolve is retaliation and hostility that was being directed toward me. Well, surprisingly, I mean, I thought OSHA would do something. They did not do anything. They would not go in and inspect Pfizer. And they had documents of people falling down. They had documents of unresolved, serious public health and safety issues. And they would not go in and do a lab inspection. My exposure records went all the way from Hartford to Boston to Washington, D.C., and OSHA set a precedent in my case that trade secret supersedes a biotech worker's right to get their exposure records for healthcare, if you can believe it. Retaliation and hostility, they did do a year investigation, and at the end, they, I'm making a long story short, after the appeals and everything, I finally got the reason why they threw the case out. And they documented that I had a character flaw and was out to get money. And this is when I had been hospitalized. I don't know how many ambulance rides I had to take. I can't tell you how disappointed I was, I suppose, that this was going on and workers had no protections. And I found out, I was so surprised, after 23 years of working in this industry, I found out there's no regulations, no oversight, no workers' rights on the local, state, or federal level. So I was forced into a federal lawsuit because I was so sick that I needed those exposure records. And I had to try to get the exposure records through the federal lawsuit. Now, what happened here is that I also had to, I was trying to go to doctors, trying to find, well, you know, find out some help. Major conflicts of interest within the biomedical community. Let me just give you one example. I had an investigation going on at the Connecticut Public Health Department. And they called me up and said, oh, your case is being dismissed, you're not really. We had a prominent scientist from Stanford University that said that these research agents are not dangerous. Well, I was developing these technologies. I knew they were dangerous, and I had evidence that this was a human infectious agent and it contained a genetic missile. That's all I knew. It was a human infectious agent. It contained a genetic missile. And I finally looked up this man. He was getting $4.7 million from Pfizer at the time to build a biotech company with Pfizer. It didn't disclose his conflict of interest. And I can go on and on with several stories of physicians, and it just, I was shocked. I was shocked at the ethics of what was going on in science. So, well, the one good thing is that the federal court finally ordered Pfizer to give me my exposure records. And then Pfizer says, I don't have them. Sorry, we don't have them. You can believe that. So, but it was interesting, the federal court never really went after Pfizer, because you can imagine, if they've claimed trade secrets to 2 federal agencies, and now they say they don't have the records, well, it's not a trade secret, so it's a lie. But nothing's done. There's no accountability, there's no responsibility, it's just, you know. And the most horrible thing was that 2 weeks before the trial, the judge threw out my claim that I had been injured at Pfizer with this genetically engineered agent. And really, the jury should have heard this evidence, because we did have scientific evidence that had an ideological link from the exposure I had, which was documented, to my illness and my medical report. But the judge afterwards dismissed herself from the case after the trial and admitted to a conflict of interest. So, you know, I'm very grateful that the jury unanimously upheld my free speech on safety issues of public concern in biotech research laboratories. You know, that should give us all hope, because it really means that the public wants safeguards. But more importantly, my story is a wake-up call to inadequate regulations and oversight on this industry. It is a wake-up call to appalling lack of rights for biotech workers. And lastly, it is a wake-up call to a biotech community that purposely blocks public awareness to dangerous technologies and injuries to workers. As more and more biolabs become established within the East Bay Green Corridor, I encourage you to understand the serious risks to your community and to support an enhancement of workers' rights so that they can protect themselves and also public health and safety. Thank you.